Hello, welcome to the video. I'd like to start with intervals across the neck and how to memorize the neck of the guitar instrument, and also how to use intervals with your ear and get into a memorization and also a way that you can learn the guitar neck through ear training, interval training, and finger dexterity and pattern recognition. It's all very simple, and at the end of this video I'm going to do a small etude, all improvised etude that shows you a certain type of theoretical approach that I personally use. So let's begin. First of all, here's my guitar, and when you're going to learn the guitar neck, what you want to do is go ahead and start with an octave pattern. So here's your initial octave pattern. Everyone sees this and knows this on the guitar, but this is how it works. Okay, do you see it? Open E and the octave E. That's your basis of the guitar instrument right there. Everyone hears that in every guitar song almost. Listen. Right? That's an octave. Oh, ah, oh, ah, oh, ah. Now that same pattern, see? It's relative. The guitar neck is relative. Ah, oh, ah, oh. So now, what do we do? Let's learn all the notes on one string. The low E string, let's learn all the notes on that. E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A, B flat, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, E, E. And then if you have 24 frets, this guitar only has 19. It's a retro guitar. So how do you apply this across the whole neck? Well, now that you know the octave interval successfully, that's everywhere is an octave, right? Now when you're doing anything with the B string, you have a major third between the G and the B. That's a standard tuning, but you don't have to tune that way, but that's just how guitars are tuned. You can tune it all in fourths if you want, but there's reasons for that. It's because the 6 strings, so you have an octave, 2 octaves. Hear it? That might be a basic concept for a lot of people, so here's the way to apply it. Now, now you know the E note across the fret, across the fretboard. Now you know the E note. Now, since E is like the prime number of guitar, the E chord, you know? So, for every scale across the fretboard, what do you have? So, listen to this. You can do it on one string, the E major scale. Hear that? So that's the E major. So listen. See? It's relative. So the more you put the patterns of relative notes into your mind, the whole fretboard begins to make sense. You have to learn scales and modes, but that's okay to learn those when you know that everything on the fretboard relates to each other, and you start with the octave, because the octave's the easiest to get into your ear. The next easiest is the fifth, and the fourth. Fifth. Are you following me here? Those are all the same notes, E and B. Now the fourth is A, so we'll do E and A. See? Now, because you know, right? E major. So you learn every note that's in the triad of E. Now if you were using a piano, they start with C, but generally the instrument of guitar is an E-based instrument. You know? So the idea I'm trying to point to you is that the fretboard is composed of not necessarily scales or modes. It's composed of intervals, and it's composed of relative intervals that are generally based around a fourth. And what I mean by that is when you tune the guitar, you're tuning by fourths. See? But you have an exception here, and the standard tuning is a third, major third. Hear it? That's a major third, but the rest of it is fourths. Okay, so put that in your pipe for a minute and smoke it. Coppertail Brewing, Unholy Triple. Alright. So the idea is all blah blah blah. We already know majors, minors, scales. We already know the modes. Basically, like if you start on your modes from C, which is what I did originally when I learned it about 15 years ago. C Ionian, D Dorian, E Phrygian, Lydian, F Lydian, G Mixolydian, A Aeolian, B Locrian, and back to the C. So if you understand that the whole neck of guitar is relative to each other, and there's a lot of combined relative intervals, so for the C would be, you know, etc. You know? So what's next after that? Where do we go to kind of break the tension or break the rut that you might be in guitar instrument? So here's the thing. We got to break away from the standard idea of modes and break away from the standard idea of interval training. And now, here's where the mad scientist of modern classical music and shred guitar or jazz guitar or even death metal can kind of interrelate to each other. Biatch. So match your voice with the note. See, what interval is that? Do you know? It's a major 7. Oh, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, right, here we go. Okay. So those those are different major sevens that can be combined. So I want to think in terms of interval, ear training, and fret knowledge. So here we go. Let's go to F sharp. Let's do a G on top of that. Da, dee, da, dee. Now listen to this. Da, dee. So here is, this is not that difficult, but it might be intermediate to getting towards advanced music. Here we go. Now that's an interval stack. F sharp, G, G sharp, E. See, it's these notes. An octave and a 2 octave higher correlation. And now this pattern, as with all chords on guitar, can be moved about relative to each other. See? Or you could do it the other way down. See what I'm starting to do here? All right. The opposite. See? And now how will you know what the notes are? Either you can know it by your ear, because these are not that difficult of intervals, because of the dissonance. It's a sharp dissonance. So based on the tonal dissonance, see, this is the most consonant. Consonant. Now dissonant would be, you see what I'm saying? Try that. Dissonance. So what I'm saying is you can learn the whole fret by learning individual strings, doing the scales on individual strings or intervals. Okay. Fourths. Let's add some root notes to the fourths. Right? Okay, so now you get the idea that the fretboard is a repeatable pattern. So every single interval has basically a finger shape on the guitar, and we're talking standard tuning. Now if you were to use alternate tunings or alternative tunings, basically you just relearn the shapes, and it may seem like a lot to the beginners, but the more comfortable you get across the neck, and it's not that difficult to do, it's just a matter of connecting the dots and listening with your ears. Then you just relearn the position. So if you tune to like the Led Zeppelin tuning, Dad Gad, or make your own like Fad Rad or something, you know, you would find out that a 6 like that is actually like a major second or something, right? Or minor second. Or so my ear training, and yours too, should become easy where you can recognize every single interval. So let me show you what intervals we have. Octave, flat 9, 9, major third an octave up, or 10, 10 major, 11, flat or sharp 11, 12 or fifth, flat 13, 13, etc. Now it usually goes up to 13. Your 13 chord, you know, is like that. There's inversions are when you change the way they're patterned on the fret. Same notes but different layout. But I'm not going to get into that because it's not my area of interest really with inversions. I like intervals and I like relative harmonies. Major 7. Now if you stack the major 7, see, that's dissonant. La, 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 See, sharp, well, flat 9 basically. So the concepts that I'm trying to get through to you, and so you can learn this, is basically like, not only do you have intervals, which make up scales, supposedly. A lot of things in music theory are basically traditional. It's not necessarily provable to the laws of science or of nature. But that doesn't matter. So we're not necessarily in the avant-garde approach to guitar training and musical knowledge necessarily going to take at face value musical tradition, although we want to find the musical laws that surround us in the cosmos. That is what intervals, as far as using intervals for what they are in their abstract form, is more about cosmic and natural processes. So it's philosophical music. That interval, as we have in the 12-tone equal temperament, see, it sounds nice. But mind you, in microtonal temperaments, you can have variations of dissonances that we don't tend to recognize in our pedagogy. You know, in microtonal, but we're not going to cover that. The reason it's 12 is because 12 equal temperament is close to the mean tone temperaments, and it's close to the well-tempered clavier temperament, which allows for equality in all the keys supposedly, but some of the major thirds definitely suffer. That's why you can't always tune the guitar properly. You can see that like Steve Vai and some of the people have these specially weirded out frets and stuff because they're trying to make 12-tone equal temperament work according to natural harmony and natural law. It's not going to really happen. Everything's an approximation. no matter what temperament you're in, it's an approximation. I personally like 31 tone equal temperament, and I like some of the more macro temperaments too. So that's irrelevant. 12 tone is fine. It's just commonly accepted, and it's thought of as some kind of like concrete rule that 12 tone is correct or not. Basically, 12 tone has come to us because of polyphonic music of the medieval monks and basically the Christian church. So God bless, right? It's not a bad tuning because it covers a lot of the intervals of the harmonic spectrum. But it's not perfect at all, and it's missing some things. But it's definitely useful. So you can get dissonances or clever. So the point I'm trying to show you is that every relative note on the fretboard can be applied, depending on the root note, to certain melodic and harmonic or harmonic structures of chordal and tonal music that's considered jazz or free or avant or microtonal or serialistic classical music or something like that. But I don't need to tell you about that, because this lesson I intend for anybody that wants to kind of break out of a mold they're in and see things from a different idea. The augmented, all the different types of scales, if you begin to see them as interval relationships without tonality, then you can really apply it to improvisation in a different way. So instead of seeing it where you have a triad and like the more standard jazz like lessons and stuff, we'll see triads as inferior to the more sophisticated jazz chords. But on the other hand, when you subtract everything from music and see what the natural laws have given us, you have something that's less, let's say, taking the triad for granted and seeing it more as a triad is a structure in itself that is created of harmonic value. Harmonic value being the overtone series of each note of the harmonics themselves. So each of those notes that's in the harmonic series for some reason is true to nature at all times. So those are basically the substructure of theoretical knowledge. So those are more useful than, say, strictly a chord language that human beings have devised. So that's why I encourage you to not feel like you're stuck at the 12th fret, where you could be an open, an 11, and then a 13. And then where would you go? Listen. See? This is just intervals, so the ear can know every interval. And you have, I displayed all the intervals. So across the whole neck, no matter what scale you want, no matter how strange a scale it can be converted throughout your ear, your fingers, and your mental recognition or memorization of those structures, either sonically, visually, or let's say technique oriented. So that we have these normal modes that have come to us, and they say these are from the Greek modes, and we just take that for granted. Of course they're from Greek, but the Greeks did not tune in 12-tone equal temperament. They probably had an instrument in each one of those modes, and the intervals were far different than what we use. So that's just a given. But instead of sticking to those scales that most popular music is written in, you can create scales that are very obtuse. So what I'm trying to get at is that when you have the definitions of the intervals themselves, and you know that they create harmony and polyphony, multitudes of notes at once, you could take anything. See? And create these sort of chords that aren't based on scales or modes, but based on intervallic relationships and the geometry, the relative distance of the ratios themselves. So this is kind of like avant-garde theory, but it applies to anything in music. But you can apply it to the standard scales and use it in that way. So in my playing, and with knowledge of the fretboard and with knowledge of intervals in a very comfortable way, but I don't necessarily focus on standard approaches to theory. Now, whether or not I was incapable to do that, or some things you're attracted to just because of who you are. So, I look at some dissonances and some scalar fragments, like the major scale, you see? And so what you can do is kind of weave an impression of multimodal music or polymodal scale creation, where even within the 12-tone dialogue, so So there's a million scales that necessarily are not from point 1 to point 8. They can be fragmented and applied to each other. And so you're not using scales anymore. What you're using is a form of serialism, the kind of composition that involves all 12 notes in a ordered way and in a sort of practitional way where the 12 notes can be related to each other in 4 directions. Retrograde, inverse retrograde, forward, and I guess diagonal or something. I forget what it was, but it forms basically a grid of the 12 notes. So it's kind of like a magic number or something. So music and numbers, that's your friend. But numbers by themselves are not music. They have to involve the heart and the mind and the ear. So okay, let me think if there's anything else to cover in this lesson. What key am I in? Well, that's the thing. The key, conceptually, this depends on the song. This depends on the piece. It doesn't have to have a key per se, but what it can have is a sort of counterpoint, like in Bach. You have, like in Art of the Fugue, you have a central melodic phrase. So it can go out of the key, like Art of Fugue is in D minor. It can go to like E, and it can go to like A, and it can go to B flat, and it can go to B natural for a while in the counterpoint, and still eventually return to D. So at the whole, through the whole piece, is not in the key of D. So you saw that. Now it's F sharp major. Now to get back to D minor, see? Now you can switch it. Now that would be our entrance back to the D. You know, so that's good. I hope that you can see that the fretboard is not impossible to conquer. No matter how you approach scales and modes, the important part is that you remember that every interval is the same throughout the fretboard. And so if you know the idea is that the intervals are the same, look, a major 7 is the same, except you have to apply the B string. What I mean by apply the B string is the shapes do change a little. That's the same exact interval, so relatively those notes are always going to be the same. E, E flat, C sharp, C natural, B, B flat, G, F sharp, G, F sharp, G, F sharp, That's one of my favorite intervals. I also like this interval. E, F, C, C sharp. But see, on the B string, it's going to be a little bit wider there. So I would almost place more emphasis on ear training of the intervals, which can be performed on keyboard, than on memorizing the finger shapes of the fretboard. So that's one of the reasons why I did not feel drawn to the Guitar Grimoire series of books, because it just lays out 1,000 scales without giving you the basis for scales on the neck. So instead of having to go through all thousands of scales and somehow work through them all, you could find out the key to creating your own scales and to creating your own modes, because modes are just based off of the root scale, you know. So if you have harmonic minor, the fifth mode of harmonic minor is the Arabic sounding, Egyptian sounding, you know. No. You know, the basic stuff. So that gives you an idea. So to get your timing down, a metronome is your best friend for your first maybe 6-7 years of practicing. So you can really get an idea of what timing is about. After that, it's going to be part of you and you're going to be your own metronome. But I recommend a metronome. So you want to get faster, you practice your scales, and if you want to practice natural minor, that's just as good as practicing an obtuse augmented plus scale. So like a regular minor with your metronome. So with your metronome, dot 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 dot. Dot 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 dot, you know. But if you're doing some very stranger scales, you could almost do scales that are so bizarre. I mean, like. Combine anything. So there's, out of 12 notes, the scale choices, and you can do scales that don't repeat at the octave. You can do 2-octave scales. I mean, scales to me are not essential as the training of your ear for intervals and color and scale choice. But then again, I'm going a little bit against traditional pedagogy. So okay, now I'm going to do an etude that will demonstrate some of these topics, and it's a live improvisation. So let me go ahead and hit record on my handy dandy Fostex. Okay, here is the Etude of the Monkey. That's what I call it. Here we go. See it? Okay, part two. Take a breath in. Take a little drink. Thank you.
Resulting from her ability or her willingness to share everything, just about,